Hello and welcome to video lecture 1B, More on Moral Principles. This slide should look familiar. It's the summary of video lecture 1A. This lecture picks right up where that one left off. In particular, we will focus on the moral principles section of this summary. We will identify a number of moral principles that will give us a really good start in thinking about the whole issue of moral reasoning and moral decision making. We will also introduce and discuss several important properties and characteristics of moral principles. As we said in Lecture 1A, a moral principle is a general rule or guideline for moral behavior. It is also intuitively clear. In other words, there will not be a serious debate over whether the principle should be one of our fundamental guidelines for behavior. For example, one of the principles we will look at in just a moment is that of non-injury. We should behave in ways that do not harm other people. That is, in general, it's wrong to hurt people. We should try very hard to avoid it. I trust none of you will have any problem adopting this as a general guideline for your life. In fact, I'm sure you've already done that throughout your lives. It's very common for people to think of moral principles and guidelines as controversial and very highly debated. But moral controversy comes in at the level of the moral dilemma, which we mentioned in Lecture 1A and will discuss more fully later in this lecture. At the level of general moral principles, there really isn't much debate at all. We're going to create a list of 14 moral principles that apply to a whole lot of the moral dilemmas we will face in our lives. As we will see, these are by no means the only moral principles there are, but they all have that intuitive quality we were just talking about. They are all so clearly the right thing to do that we don't have to worry about any serious objection to them. Many of these principles are derived from the work of 20th century British philosopher W.D. Ross, whom you read about in this week's web reading. You will undoubtedly recognize many of these as from Ross's list of what he calls prima facie duties. I changed some of the names, but the ideas are the same. And by the way, if you've not yet read that web reading, you should stop this video and go read it. It will help you the following materials make more sense. It's not very long at all. It should only take you 15 or 20 minutes if that long. So go ahead. I'm serious. Go read the web and come back. Okay. Well, as we just mentioned, the first of these moral principles is non-injury. Don't do anything that will cause harm to other people. This is not just talking about physical harm. It includes any damage to a person's life, physical, psychological, personal, financial, whatever. The point is, don't do anything that will likely leave others worse off than they were before you acted. The second is similar to non-injury, but with a very important difference. It is the principle of harm prevention. This is also a prohibition against harming others. However, it's not just about doing bad things to other people. It's about keeping bad things from happening, things that you didn't do. If you see that someone is about to be harmed, you should do what you can to keep it from happening. Even if it isn't your fault, if you become aware of the danger, you should take any opportunity you have to keep it from happening or to lessen its impact. Again, obvious, makes sense. Next is beneficence. This is the opposite of do no harm. This says do good. In addition to not making people's lives worse, we should also act to make people's lives better. Now let's pause for a moment and look at these first three principles. They all have directly to do with the effects we can have on other people's lives. It is often possible for us to hurt people. We should not take those opportunities. It is also often possible for us to keep people from being hurt and even doing something good for them. We should take those opportunities. Morality is at its core a matter of seeing other people as important in and of themselves and worthy of our consideration. These three principles speak directly to this definition. The next principle is honesty. This is the prima facie duty that Ross calls fidelity. We should speak and behave honestly. We should properly represent ourselves to the world. We should keep our promises. We should not engage in manipulation or deception. Our lives should be WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. We now have a couple of principles that might not be as apparent as the four we've already looked at. The first is gratitude. It might not be clear at first what this means. Gratitude, of course, is thankfulness. We are thankful because someone has done something beneficial for us. But being thankful isn't really an action, it's a feeling. However, there are two obvious ways our thankfulness can be carried out in actions. The first is to return the graciousness. Do something beneficial for the one to whom you are thankful. The other is to pay the graciousness forward. Someone has been kind to you, so you should be kind to someone else. We would all think of these actions as wonderful gestures. However, according to Ross and many others, they are much more than that. They are duties morality demands of us. And I agree with them. Well, a lot of ethicists agree with him. The next is reparation. This comes from the verb repair and means to make up for any harm you've caused. So, if you failed to live up to non-injury, you should then do what you can to repair the damage you caused. Again, morality is about seeing others as important in and of themselves. We do not have the right to interrupt their lives in harmful ways. So, some people argue over whether or not this principle applies in situations where you caused the harm but did not do it intentionally. The way I see it, the key issue is the harm you caused, not whether or not you meant to do it. The person's life is damaged because of your action. The burden of reparation is on you, whether it was your fault or not. When we talk about marketing ethics in a few weeks, we will see a place where this point becomes very important. We complete this column with the principle of justice. Justice is about treating everyone in a community fairly. Discussion of exactly what fair treatment amounts to would take an entire course by itself. In fact, many colleges have courses that do just that. For now, we can borrow from American philosopher John Rawls and think of justice as the distribution of benefits and burdens fairly within a community. In other words, people are not required to contribute to the community any more than they should, and tax burden is an obvious example of this. Furthermore, they will receive their fair share of the good things a community offers, like safety, public recreation and entertainment, opportunities for scholarships and other forms of community assistance, etc. Our second column of principles begins with self-improvement. We should practice beneficence, harm prevention, and non-injury toward ourselves. We should take care of ourselves and work to better ourselves, like you're doing right now by being in school. Now, these 8 principles correspond to the 8 prima facie duties that Ross first introduced and that Garrett discusses in our web reading. But you'll recall that Garrett proposed 3 additions to Ross's list, and they are all excellent suggestions, so we will put them on our list here. The first is respect for rights. Now, Garrett actually says respect for freedom, but I think rights is a more accurate term here for reasons I won't bore you with. All people around us have rights: human rights, civil rights, rights because of their position or station or because of their relationship to us. By definition, it is immoral to violate the rights of another person. So respect for rights demands a place on our list and in our priorities. Next is special care. Now again, I've changed Garrett's wording. He simply says care. And again, I won't bore you with the reasons for my change. But we hold different relationships with different people in our lives. And these different relationships affect what people have the right to expect from us. Your family and close friends have the right to expect much more from you than casual acquaintances or even people that you don't know at all. So this principle states that we should act to honor those special relationships and those special rights that those close to us have: spouses, partners, family members, good friends, etc. The third of Garrett's 3 additions is non-parasitism. This time I stuck with Garrett's wording. It's ugly and unfamiliar, but I simply couldn't think of anything better. The word parasitism actually comes from the word parasite. Non-parasitism is basically the principle, don't be a leech. The principle demands that we not be parasites or leeches on society or on our families. We should pull our weight, do what we can to contribute. Each member of a community who benefits from that community should also contribute to it so that others may benefit. That's how community works, whether it's your family, your neighborhood, or your nation. I will finish off the list with 3 more principles that I think are comparable to these in importance and in frequency of application. The first of these is universalizability. Talk about ugly and unfamiliar words. But again, there's not really a better one for this concept. I take this principle from the Ethics of Immanuel Kant. We will not study Kant's theory directly, but it is one well worth knowing about. Readings 3-3 and 3-4 at the end of chapter 3 of your text deal with Kant and his ethics, in case you'd like to learn more about it. Kant believed there was one basic rule in morality. We must act the way that we believe everyone should act. Should everyone tell the truth? Yes. So you should tell the truth. Should everyone keep away from other people's possessions? Yes. So you should do it as well. So we must not do something, we must only do something if it is universalizable, if it is something that everyone should do. We use this intuition all the time. We say things like, what if everybody acted that way? We understand that when it comes to morality, nobody is special. What is required of any of us is required of all of us. Next is utility maximization. This comes from the theory of utilitarianism, which you read about in chapter 3. Utilitarianism is, by far, the most popular way of thinking about ethics in the world today, particularly in the world of business and politics. The basic idea is this: we should do that which will bring about the greatest balance of benefit over harm for everyone involved. We've already seen how our first 3 principles focus on our responsibility to refrain from harming people and to look for ways to benefit them. This principle says that we should consider the harm and benefit that any action will cause and take the action that will do the most good and prevent the most harm overall for everyone involved, for all stakeholders. And finally, there is the golden rule. We should act toward others the way we think others should act toward us. Now, this one's very familiar. It may be the most widely quoted and applied moral principle in history. I'm frankly a little surprised that neither Ross nor Garrett included it. But just a couple of quick notes on this very familiar guideline. First, notice that what the golden rule does not say. It does not say that we should treat others the way they have treated us. This is not an eye for an eye or payback's a bitch. The entreaty here is to behave properly toward others regardless of how they behave toward you. Treat them the way you think they should treat you, not the way they do treat you. Now notice what else this doesn't say. The golden rule does not say treat others the way you want to be treated. Just because we want something doesn't mean we should get it. Any parent knows that what a child wants is often exactly what she should not have. Morality is about doing what's best for others, not about what others desire. So the golden rule calls on us to carefully examine exactly what would be in another's best interests and then act accordingly. I assume that it's clear to you that each of these 14 principles represents a good guideline for morally upright behavior. However, before we move on from here, it's important to note several significant facts about these principles. First of all, these 14 principles constitute an open-ended list. We do not assume that this is an exhaustive collection of all the moral principles there are, or that all moral dilemmas can be resolved on the strength of one or a subset of these principles. Ross noted of his 8 prima facie duties that they were merely representative, and that we could very well add more. And of course, Professor Garrett and I did just that to get our list from 8 to 14. And we will add more as the term goes along. In particular, we will add a set of what I call discipline-specific principles. The idea here is that certain professions or other fields may develop moral principles that pertain specifically to the kinds of moral dilemmas that arise often in that particular field. So in this class, we will compile a list of business-specific moral principles. Doctors and other medical professionals could have medicine-specific or healthcare-specific principles. Attorneys and judges could identify law-specific or justice-specific principles, and so on. Also, these principles are, to use Ross's word, prima facie. This is a fancy Latin term that basically means at first glance. The best way to translate the phrase with regards to moral principles is that they apply all things being equal. This, of course, suggests that all things aren't always equal. So what happens then? Well, the most common case of all things not being equal for these principles is the fact that they can sometimes conflict with each other. For example, there's an age-old moral conundrum. Is it wrong to lie in order to save someone's life? Here we have the principles of honesty and harm prevention in conflict. Honesty says that we should tell the truth. Harm prevention says that we should do what we can to prevent harm. But if we obey honesty, we violate harm prevention, and so on. Such dilemmas show that it's not possible to follow these principles every time they are applicable. When principles conflict like this, we cannot follow one without violating the other. So what are we to do? One solution Ross says that we don't have, there is no hierarchy of duties or of principles, showing which are more important than which. In other words, the list of principles cannot be simply ranked 1 to 14 in importance, so that all we do when they conflict is just check the list and see which one is higher. For any 2 principles, it is possible for the first to be more important than the second in some circumstances, and the second to be more important than the first in other circumstances. In fact, this is the very essence of a moral dilemma. Recall from Lecture 1 that a moral dilemma makes you feel like no matter what you do, you'll be doing something wrong. Well, here's why. If principles are conflicting and you cannot follow both, then in a sense, no matter what you do, you will be doing something wrong. If you decide to lie in order to save a friend's life, then you're doing something wrong, you're lying. On the other hand, if you decide to tell the truth, because you shouldn't lie, then you'll be doing something wrong because you will be doing that which you'll be causing harm to your friends. So either way, you'll be doing something that a moral principle you believe in tells you not to. But you're doing what you do because you judge that the moral principle behind your action is the proper one to follow in this case. It overrides the principle it is conflicting with. In other words, you are deciding to act on what you see to be the applicable principle. You see it as the right principle to follow in this instance. So, for example, if you're living in Poland in 1940 and you're hiding your Jewish neighbors from the Nazis, most people will say that when the Gestapo comes to the door, they're going to lie through their teeth. So here the judgment is that in this case, harm prevention overrides honesty. Harm prevention is the applicable principle. On the other hand, suppose I'm contacted as a reference for a friend who on a job application. I know my friend really needs a job, but I also know that he would not be a good person for this job. If the company hired him, he would not deliver what they need. Once again, honesty is conflicting with harm prevention. If I tell the truth, my friend gets hurt, but the only way to keep my friend from getting hurt is by lying. But here I'm going to tell the truth, even though I know I'm doing harm to my friend. So here, my judgment is that honesty overrides and is the applicable principle for this particular reason. Same two principles, honesty and harm prevention. Two different dilemmas. In one, honesty overrides, and in the other, harm prevention overrides. But how can we arrive at such decisions about what principle is the applicable principle? Well, sometimes the answer seems as intuitively obvious as the principles themselves. I think both of these cases are like that. But often there's no clear solution to the dilemma we face. In such a case, we should do some moral reasoning to figure out the answer. And as you recall from Lecture 1A, moral reasoning requires three things. It requires an understanding of moral principles. We've just gotten a good jump on this part of the equation, and we will build on it throughout the class. It also requires information. You must know the relevant facts and anything else that can have a bearing on the moral judgment to be made. It also requires deliberation. You're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to consider the principles involved, the facts of this particular situation, and other factors depending on the specific dilemma. Both of these topics, information and deliberation, and their subtopics, will be developed throughout the class.